Good morning. It's National Brotherhood Week, 1967, in Newark, New Jersey. Just 5 months before the Newark Rebellion, which was sparked by the brutal beating of Black cab driver John Smith by Newark police officers. Although National Brotherhood Week was a mid-February celebration to combat hatred and intolerance, it takes on special significance in the story you're about to hear. Some of the story I'm about to tell you contains graphic description of violence. I say this to you now so you can make whatever choices you need to so you can take in the message of my story. As I crafted this Sunday service, I considered and ultimately decided it was not only important, but necessary to include this degree of truth in order to convey the reality of the violence of the time and its impact on my family. The ultimate message that I hope I can convey is that we experience or witness wrongdoings, hurtful and even traumatic occurrences. And it's important to not hold in, to not remain silent, but to speak out about it in whatever way you can. To speak up, speak out, and speak truth. My mother, Gladys Barker Grauer, is home preparing dinner for the family. Her husband, my father, Solomon Grauer, a union organizer, won't be home until sometime later. He's leading a strike of primarily Black, Latinx, female, low-paid hospital workers at St. Michael's Hospital in Newark. Sol was no novice at protest and social action. Him and Gladys first became acquainted through protest activities in New York City and involvement with the Socialist Workers' Party fighting against racism and for civil rights. I'm in the living room doing homework and hear the phone ring. One of my father's co-organizers informs my mother that my father's being taken to the emergency room. The police beat him in the head with a billy club. No, they don't know how badly he's hurt, but he's conscious and still cursing, so he's alive. My mother goes to the living room and turns the TV to the 6 o'clock news, where me, her, and my 3 siblings see news footage of my father, head bleeding, being thrown down the stairs of Newark City Hall by Newark police. He's tumbling down the steep flight of stairs from the force of the officers shoving him, and blood is covering his head and dripping down his face. It's 1967, and there's no such thing as cell phones to speak with him directly. The extent of his injuries are unknown. My mother has to stay calm for us, but we too have already witnessed the police attack on our father. She tells us what she thinks we need to hear, that he's going to be okay and we'll be home before the night is out. She pushes back her own emotions, her fear, anger, sadness, and tries to act as if she's okay and everything else will be as well. She finishes preparing dinner and we sit at the dinner table asking about our father. My 3-year-old brother asks why the police beat Daddy. My mother is either unable or unwilling to verbalize a response. His older siblings tell him it's because they're pigs. Hours later, my father finally returns home, head wrapped in bloody bandages, covering dozens of stitches endured to close the huge gashes in his head. We children are running to see how he is, and he removes the bandages, and his head looks like Herman Munster, but patches of hair missing where the ER nurse shaved it so his wounds could be cleaned and stitched closed. He smokes, paces, and rants about the police and what they did, and we listen intently. Local 99 hospital workers union organizers led striking workers on a march to Newark City Hall, intent on meeting with then Mayor Hugh Addonizio to discuss him meeting the demands of the workers. St. Michael's Hospital at the time was owned by the city of Newark. The mayor refused to meet with union leaders, and they were prevented from entering City Hall by a line of blue police officers, outside and inside of the revolving door entrance to the building. Finally, union leaders are told the mayor will meet with them. They go into the revolving door, and as it gets to the inside of the building, instead of being allowed to step out, police officers shove them one by one back through the doors and awaiting officers who raise their billy clubs, beat them over the head, and throw them down the long and steep City Hall stairs, splitting heads open. Gladys Barker Grauer, wife, mother of 4 children, and artist, is angry and helpless to do anything about it. Her children are ages 3, 8, 10, and 13, and she doesn't know what to say. She's trying to process it all for herself, perhaps too painful and too much anger. She doesn't speak much about it. Her husband goes right back to work. Her children want to check his head every day, and although the swelling has gone down, the cuts eventually heal, the stitches removed, and the hair grows back, the trauma remains. It's the trauma beset on people of African descent and white allies for centuries by white supremacist violence, torture, and public punishment and humiliation intended to set an example for those who dare to speak out, seek freedom, and challenge injustices. Often targeting enslaved Blacks who dared to escape for freedom and unfortunately be caught, being a Black person in a white neighborhood after dark, being a person in the South of any race working to register Black people to vote, or in this case, her white husband fighting to secure a living wage and benefits for hospital workers who were mostly people of color, mothers, fathers, deserving workers. Gladys spoke out in the way she knew best and most powerfully, with paintbrush and canvas as voice, speaking loudly, strong, and unapologetically. Her outlet to memorialize and publicize the violence and brutality of police and the complicit racist injustice system. First was the pencil sketch of an octopus wearing a police hat with badge affixed, each of its 8 arms holding a billy club. Her husband and other union representatives, some bloodied and scattered down City Hall steps, others being beaten in the head as they were being shoved out of the door. The front view of Newark City Hall and its revolving door entrance. Juxtapositioned against this scene of police violence and human indifference was a banner across the front of the entrance that read, National Brotherhood Week. Over days, weeks, months, little by little, colors took hold. More details took shape. The octopus was now Caucasian colored. It was as if Gladys was laying on the proverbial psychiatrist's couch each week, enduring regular flashbacks of the assault, pouring her raw emotions out through the tip of her paintbrush, thoughtfully and carefully mulling over every detail and nuance, as if to be sure the judge and jury got the full scope of the assaults and the impact, so that upon a judgment of guilt, the punishment meted out could be befitting of the crime. That painting hung in our family room and spoke my mother's outrage for many, many years. This is my recollection of my mother's first piece of artwork on the subject of police violence, and it was hardly her last. The year 1967, 54 years ago. It was personal, cathartic, empowering, and the beginning of her critical analysis, public shaming, and awareness raising of police abuses, brutality, and violence, and subsequent injustice and racism rampant in American courts. Gladys spoke up, spoke out, and spoke truth about events that affected her and those she cared about, her family, her local and broader community, Black folks, and other people who are marginalized and targeted in myriad ways. That was her first of many, and sadly, there were and continue to be a plethora of brutal and senseless attacks, killings, and injustices perpetrated by police. One of her subjects was the 1983 murder of Michael Stewart by New York City police. Mr. Stewart was accused of painting graffiti on a subway station wall. His real crime was being a young Black male, a death sentence at the hands of police. Gladys felt deeply the 1984 murder of Eleanor Bumpurs, a Black disabled woman in her late 60s who refused to leave her apartment when police came to remove her for a court eviction order, per court eviction order. When Ms. Bumpurs refused to open her door for police, they broke in, grabbed her, and one of the officers shot her to death with a 12-gauge shotgun. Gladys's painting shows Ms. Bumpurs lying on the floor of her home, bloodied with holes straight through her body. She created woven paintings of Mumia Abu Jamal, a Black man falsely accused of and convicted in 1982 of killing a Philadelphia police officer and then sentenced to death, and of Leonard Peltier, a Native American activist wrongly convicted in 1977 of killing 2 FBI agents. Each of their portraits are framed with prison bars and painted on woven plastic bags, simply stating, "Free Mumia Abu Jamal" and "Free Leonard Peltier." These 2 pieces of my mother's artwork were the center of a federal lawsuit she filed and won in 2008 against the County of Morris in New Jersey for violating her First Amendment rights by removing these from a public art exhibit because the county prosecutor was said to be offended by them. She spoke up, spoke out, and spoke truth. Gladys's weaving in 2014, titled "Killed by Law Enforcement," is a sea of headstones with the names, ages, at death, and towns of people, mostly young Black males, killed by police in New Jersey. Her inspiration for this piece was a book titled "Stolen Lives, Killed by Law Enforcement," that includes over 2,000 people, mostly killed in the mid to late 1990s, who were victims of police brutality and murder throughout the United States. Gladys said their names. She was moved by the stories, all verified, of senseless killings by police and the disregard for these precious human lives who mattered to their families, friends, and communities. Her 2015 piece titled "Justice" depicts the inequities of the justice system, particularly for Black males. She tackled this issue in an earlier painting she did that includes many important cases involving African Americans, injustice, and the scales of justice being imbalanced against us. That painting, titled NAACP Legal Defense Fund, circa 1980s, depicts some of the most notable landmark cases handled by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund concerning lynchings, racial segregation in education, the right to self-defense for Blacks, and racial hate motivated prosecutions. Wanted Dead or Alive is a painting that includes Harriet Tubman, Angela Davis, and Assata Shakur. Among Gladys's other subjects are the murder of Trayvon Martin and racist vigilante Bernard Goetz. My mom's death a year and a half ago leaves me wondering what she would now be speaking and creating if she were here to witness the worldwide outrage, protests, response, and discourse to the most recent police brutality and murders. She chronicled and exposed a lot of these incidents for over half a century. She wasn't a big talker, particularly about her feelings, but she found her own way of expression. A mural featuring my mother was created in late 2019, just a couple of months after her death, by a group called Womb of Violet Collective, and sits prominently on the side of a 10-story building in downtown Newark, which was her home. It's the largest of the recent murals in Newark and serves as a reminder to all to speak up, speak loud, and speak truth. So I'll close by saying, be like Sasha the Bear from Today's Time for All Ages and roar. And be like Gladys and speak with your hands, or speak up in whatever way you are best able to.